Paedeia and the Paedeia Education Podcast, Episode 4, The Case for Recess. If you have a child in school, or you have been listening to the Paedeia podcast over the last few weeks, you know that we are in the middle of major school reform here in the United States. Our current school reform began in the 1980s and has resulted in major changes to our educational system and the way in which our children spend their days at school. While this change has brought some improvement, there have been several casualties along the way. Namely, we have significantly reduced our children's exposure to the arts, music education, and physical education. While those are more structured, extracurricular, quote-unquote non-essential courses, our kids have also missed out on recess. Now, of course, a lot of people view recess as just time for kids to play. In this podcast, Dr. Richard and I review some of the essential components of recess and how recess actually plays a vital role in our overall child development, cognitive development, and social development. We believe that recess should be a daily activity for our kids with the goal of promoting overall healthy development. So we hope you enjoy the podcast, and again, as always, we hope that it gives you something to talk about and something to think about so that you can join in on the conversation. Just a few updates before the podcast begins. Our November newsletter is now available on the website PACFlorida, PACFlorida.com. You can sign up for the newsletter there and receive it in your inbox on a monthly basis. Also, we want to give you the update for our next workshop, which will be held on December 11th. The title of the workshop is Managing the Holidays. During this 3-hour workshop, Dr. Richard and I will be presenting on some of the stressors and issues related to the holiday season and how you can best manage this time of year. As always, we encourage you to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Dr. Berney, @DrBerney. And on Facebook, we have several Facebook pages, including Paedeia, Paedeia. The Mental Breakdown is another Facebook page that you can follow for mental health updates. And then our Practice Facebook page, which is Psychological Associates of Central Florida. If you listen to us on iTunes, we encourage you and request that you write a review or rate us. By you providing a rating or review, that increases our visibility so that others can join in on the conversation. As always, the more voices, the more impact. Okay, I think that's all of the updates for this week. So sit back, enjoy the podcast, and if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We always look forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much, and enjoy Episode 4, The Case for Recess. All right, welcome to Episode 4 of the Paedeia Education Podcast. I'm Dr. Berney.
And I'm Dr. Richard.
And Richard, I'm on the right channel for
Good.
for Mixler. I've got everything recording right. For those of you who aren't aware, we recorded our other podcast on Friday, the Mental Breakdown, and we had all kinds of technical things going on. So it was an exciting little shuffling of things to try to get everything moving and going where it needed to go. So, but I think we're all set today to talk about recess. So the title of today's episode is Episode 4, The Case for Recess. And we wrote a column for the Lakeland Ledger this past week that was published on, today. Today's right. Sunday the November 22nd. Yeah. 22nd. And in the column, we talked about recess, and so we thought we would do the podcast today on the same topic and kind of expand it a little bit. We only have about 600 or 700 words that we can use in the ledger column, and so I think a lot more needs to be said.
Right.
So,
and it is a topic of current interest because the Polk County School Board has a study group that assembled. Studying the issue of recess. There's considerable parent and teacher support for recess, but it's not a simple decision. And so this group of stakeholders, including administrators, parents, and teachers, are meeting to see if we can, I guess the right word would be re-implement educate recess into our schools, because it has been done away with. One of the casualties of No Child Left Behind, when somebody made the decision that we needed more instructional time.
Right.
And I think we'll go into that in the course of this podcast. But so it is a topic of current interest locally. So.
Right. And yeah, so let's start by going back just a little bit and talking about really why we need to talk about this. And recess. Well, as we've talked about in previous podcasts, especially episode 3 from last week, school reform and the current state of our education system has led to a lot of changes. Part of those changes has been the focus on what I call academic engaged time. The focus has been, we need to make sure that students are in class and learning as much as possible to improve their learning, their academic performances, their test performances, and things like that. Intuitively, that sounds perfect. No problem there. We'll kind of go into some other things later on as it relates to that. But because of the way that the school systems and our sort of philosophy for schools have changed, we've started getting rid of what some consider non-essentials. And some of those non-essentials are things like PE, art, music, those kinds of things. And there's certainly been a lot of talk about this over the years. And I feel, unfortunately, I feel that a lot of that talk has gone unheard because, the people who have been talking about, well, we need to get art back in school have traditionally been art teachers. Mm-hmm. Those people who talk about we need to get music back in school have tended to be art and music teachers.
Or individuals who have a particular interest in those subjects, right?
Right. And I think that is, it's great that those people are talking out, but it unfortunately has failed to really gain any momentum in this talk against removing these things from our classrooms and from our schools, because the voice just wasn't loud enough. On one hand, you have the art and music teachers and some of these individual families saying, hey, we need to get these things back in school. And on the other side, you have this crowd of people yelling, no, we need more academic engaged time. Right. And it just, I think that the voice of those who are calling for more art education and music education, they're just being drowned out.
Right. And also, the Chicago public schools haven't had recess for 30 years.
Wow.
Which I didn't realize. I think part of the reason was safety and part of the reason was time. But certainly the biggest factor in reducing time for what are called non-essentials like art, music, PE, and recess was to give students more time in class.
Right.
And that really accelerated when No Child Left Behind was passed, because now you had punitive measures. Schools were actually punished if they underperformed.
Right.
So schools with low-performing students in particular got the message with No Child Left Behind and said, then let's eliminate everything that's not essential and let's have as much instructional time as possible. So while we typically think of recess being a casualty of No Child Left Behind, school districts were beginning to eliminate it for other reasons as well. So we don't want to pick on No Child Left Behind excessively, but I think that No Child Left Behind was a driving force to eliminate what are referred to in education as non-essentials.
Right. And we're going to get into that in much more detail, because I think that is a critical point, and that's also going to be a major issue that really affects what we do about it. And so we're going to get to that. But first, Richard, let's spend a few minutes talking about, about why these other, I always use air quotes, though nobody listening can see that we use air quotes when we say non-essentials.
See it when we do that, right?
The issue is that as neuropsychologists, we know that these non-essentials have an important place in brain development.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about some of this because I think that, again, these are details that are lost. Okay, so let's talk about, for example, physical education. Clearly, physical education has a role that far exceeds just going outside and playing.
Right.
And again, what we're going to talk about here with PE, physical education, it is different than recess. Mm-hmm. Recess is more of an unstructured, free interaction, free play time type of time, as compared to physical education, which is a more structured, which we're defining as a more structured time where students are learning particular things about athletics. They're doing particular things to understand their physical body and how their body interacts with the world around them. So,
and it's about skill development.
Correct.
Right? There's a prescribed skill that they're expected to master. Mm-hmm.
Correct. And so when we think about physical education, clearly physical education has a place that far exceeds just the kids going out and being on the PE field for 30 minutes a day.
Right.
Not just the physical benefits of going out and exercising. Right. It's hard to not at least acknowledge the correlation between our childhood obesity rates and the decline of physical education opportunities. Those two things seem to be happening at the same time. Kids are playing less, they're outside less, they're gaining weight, and they're not as physically fit. That should be obvious to all of us. For many kids, PE, physical education, was their primary source of exercise. That's right. During the day. If we have, say, 3rd and 4th grade students, they go home after school and they have to stay inside because of either the weather or because their parents aren't home, latchkey kids and things like that. They come home and they need to stay in the house because they're not allowed to go out and play. And then their parents don't get home until later, so now it's too dark to go out and play. Physical education would have been the only time for them to get any physical exercise. Right. So it's important for our physical development.
Right. And I think we need to remember that for many children, the food that they eat at school is the only food they get all day.
Right.
Likewise, the exercise they get at school might be the only exercise they get all day. If they live in a small apartment in a dangerous neighborhood, they're not going to be able to go out and play.
Right.
So this may... So when we talk about food and rest and hygiene, and I think we need to talk about play or recess in the same way, that this may be the only opportunity they have all day to go out.
Right, right. And and I certainly have patients where this is the case, and it's sad talking about kids who can't go outside and play, and then when they try to play inside the house, well, there's rules, no throwing a ball inside the house, no running inside the house. And so these kids really have no opportunity to explore themselves physically and to get exercise and those. And
the terrible irony is that the children who need these breaks are these children living in, particularly children in poverty, living in small apartments, who don't have the opportunity. Those are the same kids who are underachieving. And schools are saying, we can't let the underachieving kids out to play because we have to give them more instructional time.
Right.
So it's this terrible circle that we find ourselves caught in.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is at least part of the importance of physical education. It's much more important than just, hey, the kids need to go outside and play. This is for their physical health. This is for their... And it teaches them, I remember taking PE in high school, and you learn about how your body works. Right. Physical education oftentimes is the place where you learn, what, I can't move my leg in that direction, or I can't exert that type of force on my body without some kind of discomfort. Right. And so that's how we learn how our body works. Right. So again, PE is really important. It's not a non-essential. Mm-hmm. It is an essential component of education. It is an essential component of how we learn who we are and how our body works.
Right.
Now, when we think about art, well, for those of you who are interested in art, we don't really need to tell you how important art is to our emotional and cognitive development. Art is a wonderful way, is a vital way for us to help our brain develop in different ways than it develops when we're learning to read and do math. It's a different system that is developed.
That's right. It's not art is not just about creativity and about making nice things. You want to develop your whole brain. I mean, there's more to our brain than the neurons we use for reading or for math. Yes, they're important. Yes, they're vitally important. Yes, they're primarily important. But we want to develop all brain regions. And to do that, you have to... That's why all these classes were introduced into schools, because even years ago we knew that to develop the whole person, now we say develop the whole brain, you need activities other than academic activities based on verbal skills.
Right.
So art and music and PE all play a role in developing the entire brain, all the brain regions.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, and Richard, you and I both, we have artists in our family.
Right.
And some of the things that are just fantastic. Last a couple years ago, my daughter was in a AP art class, and they had these recurring activities, recurring assignments. And I'm not sure how it got to this, but my daughter had to do a series of art pieces in different medium, drawing, color pencils, chalk, different medium, on mental illness. And so each piece that she had to create was on a different mental illness.
Oh, okay.
She gained an appreciation of that topic in a way that she probably never would have in any other type of class, because she had to, not only did she have to learn about the disorder or the condition itself, but she then had to express it in a way that was meaningful to her. Right. I remember seeing that piece that your son did on the history of the universe.
Right.
That was amazing.
It took him a long time to do that. He had to learn it. He had to learn a lot.
Right, and he had details in there, and the math in and of itself that was involved in saying, well, if this is the linear timeline that we're going to consider the history of the universe, this is the number of inches or centimeters it would take from the beginning until the time that the Earth was created, and he would have to map that out. And again, it's much more of it's many times much more academic than we give it credit for.
It's a full, as it was for your daughter, it's a full cognitive process.
Right.
I mean, it utilizes and recruits. The entire brain has to be involved in these projects. Okay?
Right.
And that's what's good about art, is that it recruits parts of the brain that we don't recruit in other academic activities.
Right.
And it's not about making pretty pictures. It's about using the brain in these ways, recruiting parts of the brain that we typically wouldn't recruit in any other way.
Right, right. And again, it does it in at least a semi-structured
That's right.
setting in the art class where the students are given assignments.
Right.
Hey, here's something I want you to think about and create something based upon this idea.
That's right, because most students at elementary and middle school age are not going to pursue art or music activities at home or anywhere else, unless they take private music lessons, which most students don't take.
Right.
So this is their only opportunity to develop those kind of brain functions in those classrooms. It's structured, organized, and that's what these kids are going to need.
Absolutely.
Not just reading and math.
Right, right. But recognizing that reading and math are incorporated in the art process.
Right.
I mean, when we think about how the brain works, many of the same regions that we use for math and reading are used in art and expression.
That's right.
So, to think that these two things are mutually exclusive is short-sighted.
I think mutually exclusive is the point. That somehow somebody developed this notion that you're either doing reading or you're not doing reading. No, if you're doing art and music, you're still stimulating the same regions of the brain.
Right,
You know, I
right.
mean, it doesn't matter what you do, the brain is going to get stimulated. So they're not mutually exclusive. I think that's the important point.
Yeah, there was in our training, in our neuropsych training, we learn about different neurocognitive processes. And I hope this doesn't bore anybody, but I think this stuff is fascinating. We think about these different neurocognitive processes, and we work under the perspective that we can give this test, and if we give this test, it's a nonverbal test that looks at how the brain organizes information and puts it together. Well, someone very, very intelligent went in and looked at some of those tests and said, wait a minute, what is reading except for taking a series of symbols and organizing them together into a meaningful whole? Mm-hmm. That's exactly what reading is. And so we can't really differentiate and separate these systems into completely separate and different processes.
That's right.
They all intermingle. And when we think about Brodmann's work, and he talked about and mapped out these different regions of the brain, he was pretty clear. These regions are there, but they all work together.
That's right. They're discrete,
right.
But they work together. They work in unison.
Right. And so, sure, if there's a lesion in a particular area, we may see some very specific deficits. But what we also see are impairments in other areas as well that may not be quite as obvious.
Right.
But the difficulties are there. The limitations are present. So they're not distinct features. They're not distinct regions. They're not distinct skills. All of these things intersect with one another and work with one another to create the whole brain, as you said earlier. And the same thing with music.
Right.
Music is, in many ways, a full body experience. Mm-hmm. It is difficult many times when you're listening to a song that you like. It's difficult not to move to it because it affects your whole body. Right. And teaching children rhythm, teaching them music appreciation, again, is a very important cognitive process that affects social relationships. It affects, I heard a very smart person once say, music is math.
Right.
The way that music works is a very mathematical process.
That's right.
And in fact, you can take people who know nothing about music, but you start making some of those mathematical errors in music, and everybody can tell.
Right.
You can say, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't sound right.
Right.
So music is again another important area or subject, I guess, that affects much more than just, hey, can you play a recorder?
Right.
It permeates into who we are, because again, we as social creatures, we appreciate music.
Every culture develops music.
Right.
Every culture does, and every culture has created music. There's something fundamentally human about music.
Right.
That it permeates every culture.
Right. So, whether it's PE, art, or music, these subject areas that have been considered, with my air quotes, non-essential, we know in the psychological literature, in the educational literature, that these are really essential.
They really are
subjects. We really need to have these involved in our students' lives. Now, the challenge is that those are loosely structured activities.
Right.
These are classes. There's a music teacher, there's an art teacher, there's a PE coach. These are for just using it in the broadest sense of the word. These are more structured types of settings, which differentiates them a little bit from recess. Recess, as we described earlier, is what we're referring to as more non-structured opportunities for students to play outside, to interact with one another in an unguided way,
and with no expectation of skill development.
Right.
We don't expect them to become better at anything.
Right.
Which, unlike PE, where we do expect skill development.
Right. We're not going to major in recess, but you may major in PE. Physical education arts. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about recess now. I think that we've made the case that these non-essentials like PE, art, and music are critical. But we're going to make the same case for for recess.
Right.
Recess is a fundamental, critical part of child development. And I use the word child development intentionally there because as we have discussed in previous podcasts, what we seem to have taken out of the education system is child development, is the importance of considering the whole child and how the students progress through the developmental trajectory that we know exists.
That's right. For some reason, education has been narrowed to these academic subjects, and what we're seeking here is a broadening of the definition.
Right.
I mean, when we got No Child Left Behind, suddenly the curriculum got very, very, very narrow because of the testing that we do. Your curriculum will reflect what's tested. We teach what is on the test. Why would you have a test if you weren't teaching that material? So you teach what's on the test. No Child Left Behind came along and said, these are the things we're going to test. So now schools are very narrowly focused on those items.
Right.
So, of course, you get rid of everything that's not going to be on the test.
Right.
PE, art, music, and recess.
And that's where we get the phrase or the idea of academic engaged time.
Right.
The idea is that the more engaged a student is on these academic subjects, the more they're going to learn. And we're going to talk about the issues related to that in just a moment, because it sounds nice, it's a great soundbite, but it's not really true.
I think it's a case of overcorrection. I can remember years and years and years ago, back in the 60s and 70s, educational researchers were doing studies where they concluded that one of the problems in education is we weren't spending enough time on academics. And we said, well, where are you spending your time? Well, you have to collect lunch money. You have to take the roll. You change classes. You go out for recess. Recess is not just the time on the playground. It's lining up. It's getting out to recess. It's coming back. Everybody getting a drink, washing your hands, and educational researchers began to refer to that as non-engaged time. So if you have a 6-hour school day, they were calculating how many minutes are spent in non-engaged time. So that was probably worthwhile information to say, yeah, we really should increase engaged time. But I think we may have overcorrected. And so now we are moving in only engaged time, and we've done away with all of the non-engaged time. And I'm not sure that's worked in the best interest of teachers or students.
Right. So let's talk about, for a few minutes, some of the benefits of recess. What does recess do for us? Well, one of the things that recess is important for is the development of social relationships, social skills. Where else except for on the in an unstructured time on the playground do you figure out what is and what is not socially appropriate? You are corrected very quickly by your peers, right. and learn very quickly what is acceptable and what is not acceptable.
Right.
Now certainly there has to be some oversight to make sure that we don't have bullying and don't have some of those kinds of issues. But generally speaking, the recess play area, the recess playground, is a critical location for the development of managing and developing social skills.
Right.
How do you handle it when you're the last one picked for a particular game? How do you handle it when your team needed you to do something and you couldn't perform? How do you handle it when your team needed you to do something and you did perform? How do you handle those kinds of situations? That comes on the recess playground because nobody's telling you how to handle those situations. Right. You're just having to learn on your own. And those types of social skills are really difficult to artificially create. we try, because we do social skills training here in our office, we try to teach kids that. We try to create situations in groups and things like that to help kids learn some of these skills. But there is nothing better than the actual playground. There is nothing that is that meaningful to the child in learning some of those skills. It's just not possible to recreate. So one of the important things that comes from recess is, of course, social skills and social relationships. Mm-hmm. Another thing that recess does for us that is difficult to find in other places is that it teaches us to explore. It teaches us, especially the younger ages, imaginative play. Pretend is really, really important for some foundational base cognitive abilities. We have to learn how to do that. I remember when my daughter was really young, she had an imaginary friend, and when you're not sure about what's going on, you think, oh my gosh, an imaginary friend. And I remember talking to the psychiatrist that I worked with, Dr. Silver, and he said, I'll never forget him saying, it's wonderful for kids to have an imaginary friend. It's wonderful for them to have that type of imagination, because that is a sign, that's an early sign of intelligence. Right. He says, when a kid can differentiate reality from fantasy, and then explore real life challenges in a safe, imaginative, role-playing type of setting, that's how kids problem solve through issues, through problems. When kids play house, when kids play doctor, anything, right? In all of these types of activities, activities that you would never play in PE.
That's right. You're not going to do this anywhere else.
Right. Activities that you would never be able to do at home because you just don't have the number of people you need to really do it. Those types of activities really create and foster healthy brain development. And again, not just in the area of social skills, but also in the area of problem solving, rational thinking, all of these things that we need as a foundation for future academics.
That's right. And I think the one of the things that we want to stress here is that recess is play. Okay, it's a time when kids are supposed to play. And for the last 100 years, way back to Piaget and Vygotsky and at the turn of the 20th century, we have always considered play to be a fundamentally important part of child development. And the reason it's an important part of child development is because it's unstructured, it allows children to stretch. It allows them to go beyond any structured activity. If they're playing organized sports, they have to play within the rules. They have to play within the system. That you only get 3 strikes, or you only get. When children play, they get to extend all those things, and that's what enhances child development. And we've known that for at least 100 years, and we have taught it, and we have pushed it, and we have advocated to allow children to play. Children learn through play. We often read that play is work for children. Right. That's where children do their work, is when they're playing. And to take that away, especially in a school setting where child development should be the major focus, I think we're doing all kids a disservice.
Right. And obviously, we're not talking about high school students. No. Because by then, hopefully, they've learned most of these things that they would get from recess.
That's right.
We're talking about most in particular the early elementary school years.
Right.
Though these skills are good throughout elementary school, all the way through the 5th grade, for kids to continue to learn. That's right. You mentioned Piaget. Piaget's stages of psychological development, psychological and cognitive development, says that these kids up to about middle school, they're developing these concrete base skills that's going to be the foundation of their later formalized thinking.
And the theorist who follows him, Lev Vygotsky, the famous Russian psychologist and educator.
Vygotsky was great.
Yep, and he said the same thing. Vygotsky had this concept of the zone of proximal development,
right,
where children learn with some support. Play allows them to extend the zone of proximal development. It pushes it out just a little bit more, because they're able to do it, and because it's an unstructured situation, they're able to stretch and push just a little farther.
Right.
Where they can't do that in a structured, formal setting.
Right. I coach, I've mentioned before that I coach soccer.
Right.
And one of the things that we do with our players, whether it's my U15 team, 14 to 15-year-old players, or it's my U5 team, my little 4-year-olds, 4 and 5-year-olds, one of the things that we do is we take time every practice just to be silly.
Right.
Let's see what's the neatest trick we can try. And I'll have my little 4-year-olds out there, and they're trying to do all kinds of crazy things with the ball. But that's going to be their foundation of how does my body need to move to make this happen.
Right.
And it's, we think about our senses, and our real sixth sense isn't ESP. Our real sixth sense is proprioception, our understanding of where our body is in space.
Right.
And that comes from exploration for the most part. I mean, being able to close your eyes and touch your nose, no visual cues, no auditory cues, being able to know where your body is in space without any of these other senses, it is a very important developmental process. And kids learn that through unstructured exploration. That's how we best learn it. Because again, as I said before, it's really difficult to artificially create these kinds of situations.
That's right.
And most parents don't know how to do that. We know how to do some of that because we have had some training. But for the most part, parents don't know how to do that. They don't know what to do. So recess helps with social development. It helps with this exploration, some of this cognitive development, and just as importantly, what recess provides is it allows you to hit a reset button, so that you can be rejuvenated, so that you can have something to let go some frustration, let go some stress, go out and just run around a little bit, so that you can reset and come back and be prepared. One of the things I work with my patients, including my adult patients, is you need something to look forward to. As we said in our mental breakdown podcast the other day, there are lots of times when we do things that we don't really want to do, but we do them anyways because we need a paycheck, because for whatever reason we do them because we have to do them. Well, what helps us through that sometimes is having a goal, having something that we're looking forward to. So if we bring that down to a second grader, all you need is to have something to look forward to. Now, for them, they can't look forward to something that's a paycheck that's going to come in 2 weeks. What they need is something to look forward to that in 20 minutes, I get to go out and play on the recess field. So I can hold myself together for 20 more minutes so that I can get out there to the field and run around a little bit.
I survived elementary school with that credo.
Yeah.
I could not have done school the way my kids have done it.
Right.
I knew that about every hour and a half we were going to be outside. We went outside 3 times a day.
Yeah.
When I was in elementary school.
Wow.
Morning, right after lunch, and once in the afternoon.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and
it's amazing we learned anything.
Right. Well, there was I posted on our Facebook page this little video. I think it's from the Huffington Post. It was produced by a group called Fatherly. And it was talking about the differences between U.S. schools, elementary schools, and Finland.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things they said was, on average, meaning taking all schools into account, U.S. schools maybe spend about 15 minutes a day at recess. And that's certainly taking into consideration that many schools have no recess and other schools maybe have 30 minutes of recess, and averaging them out. Finnish schools on average spend 75 minutes a day in recess.
Really?
Yeah. So, and again, they perform much higher than U.S. schools do.
We probably did too, because we had a break mid-morning, we had a break after lunch, and we had a break mid-afternoon.
Right.
So we had 3 recesses per day.
Right.
When I was in elementary
so if each recess was maybe 20 minutes,
that's
25 minutes, there's your hour.
Mm-hmm.
So, again...
And yet we learned the multiplication tables, and we learned how to write, and we learned how to spell, and we learned cursive.
And you know words that I don't know.
That's because they're obsolete. They're archaic. It's another language.
That's right. But it's true that, that reset button, that having something to look forward to, is so important for kids. Mm-hmm. And again, I started this portion out saying that I try to teach my adult patients this. We're not learning this anymore. Kids don't appreciate this anymore, to say, you know what, if I work on this now, I can have this thing that I enjoy later.
Right.
And we're not really teaching kids that, because there is no end in sight.
Right. I want, as you're talking, I'm thinking, what must it be like for a 7 or 8 year old boy or girl, but I'm thinking about boys, to know that at 7:15 or 7:30 in the morning they enter a room and they're going to stay there until 11 o'clock, and the only time they might leave is to go to the bathroom.
Right.
If they ask to go to the bathroom to get out.
And then 11 o'clock they go to lunch. Where they're not allowed to talk.
Right. It's a silent lunch, and line up and don't do anything and don't talk. And
then they go back to that same classroom.
Right. Where
they're quiet again.
With nothing to look forward to except from what elementary schools start at 7 or 8.
8. Yeah.
And if you have lunch at 11, that means you're in this room for 3 hours without a break.
Right.
That's a lot for a kid.
Right. And for young kids, that is eternity.
That's a long time.
That's a long time.
They don't do anything for 3 hours.
Right.
I mean, think of a typical 7-year-old kid in a house. He's doing hundreds of things in a 3-hour period.
Right. Well, wow. And it's interesting because parents will say, well, he won't even sit down and watch a whole movie.
Right.
Well, a whole movie is only an hour and a half.
Exactly.
But at school, we're expecting him to do it for 3 or 4 hours.
Right. Of engaged, highly structured, with high expectations.
Right. So, the concern, of course, is that we're creating this inability to just develop the skills necessary to work through some of these challenges. And so on their own. Right. We've talked before about, it's our theory that many of the issues we have with video games and homework and all of that is for this exact same reason.
Right.
A kid says, well, any opportunity that I have to play video games, I need to play them, because who knows when I'll get to play them again. Well, because to some kids, 3 hours is, who knows when that time frame is going to end. And so they go in and they know that once I start homework, that process is going to take, in the words of kids that we talk to, forever.
Right.
So they go into it thinking this is going to last forever. Why wouldn't they be avoidant of that?
Right.
We would be as adults. If we were getting into something and in our mind it was going to be an activity that we don't like, that was going to last forever, we would be completely avoidant of that. We would never want to start that process. Right. Yet, again, we're expecting our kids to do that. We're expecting them and to do that without any fuss, without any arguments, without any complaints. And if they do, then we say, well, what's wrong with you? You have to do this every day. Why are you complaining about it? Well, they're complaining about it because they have to do it every day.
Because we have to do it every day.
So these breaks, and we recommend many times almost a recess type of break during homework. Right. Just a 5-minute break. Just get out and just reset yourself a little bit and then go back to it. Right. But recess, provides that reset. That's also important. So with all this, and we kind of had the spoiler earlier, and sort of already said why this is such an issue, because and the big issue with recess is time. Mm-hmm. Time is the primary culprit for why we don't have recess the way that we used to. And what we mean by time is we just don't have the time in the day. Mm-hmm. According to schools, we don't have the time in the day to sacrifice for this unimportant, quote-unquote, non-essential activity of we're referring to as recess. Yeah. We just don't have time for it.
Yeah, even here we use the word we're sacrificing. We're really not sacrificing.
Right.
It should be an integral part of everybody's day.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so the reason that we see this as an issue, and I say we, sort of meaning collectively, there's a growing body of literature that talks about this. There are lots of professionals talking about this. So I'm talking about we collectively. The reason that we have a problem with this is because the principle under which this idea has grown is flawed. More academic engaged time does not equate to more learning. Mm-hmm. We know that that's the case. We know that it's not true.
Yeah, that's because of erosion. I mean, the longer kids are engaged, they just wear down and wear down and wear down and wear down until finally you reach a point of diminishing returns.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. We know that about how long children at different ages can attend. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. After that point, you're really not getting much from them.
Right.
And the problem, I feel like I keep saying the problem. The problem with that is the teachers then have to assume, and it's not the teachers, it's the administrators who are saying, who are putting these practices into place, are then assuming that, well, if this is an academic engaged time, the teacher is presenting the information, therefore the student must have learned the information, and so tomorrow we go on to the next skill.
That's right.
Regardless of whether or not the students really learned the information. Mm-hmm. And so what's happening is that there is this assumption that because the information was taught during a quote-unquote academic engaged time, the material must have been mastered by the student, and therefore we can go ahead and test and move on to the next skill. Mm-hmm. There are so many problems with that perspective, that idea. I don't even know where we would begin in managing it. It's just there's nothing that makes sense about that to me, because when we have I'm going to say it, when we have this issue, when we have Common Core coming along, I see that response. No. When we have Common Core coming along saying every school has to be on the same page each day, and the teachers have to be teaching the same material each day, they're not recognizing the fact that just because a student is sitting in class does not mean that the student is mastering the information.
Well, again, we come back to that question, and this is something we talk about in our classes, and I'm sure you've discussed it in your classes as well. Just because something is taught doesn't mean that it's learned.
Right.
And schools need to focus on student learning, not on teaching. And what Common Core is doing is they're saying this is what needs to be taught each day. But there's no mechanism to make sure that it's being learned except some sort of test at the end of a 9 weeks or a semester or the end of a year.
Exactly.
That's not the way the system should be working. We don't have any. We have replaced learning with teaching, and we have said to our students for years that our pre-service teachers, just because you teach a wonderful lesson doesn't mean that your students are learning it.
Right.
And the emphasis has to be on learning, not teaching.
Right.
Okay. Teaching is a vehicle for learning. If no learning is occurring, it doesn't matter how good your teaching is. Your teaching is only as good as your students are at learning it. And Common Core doesn't accommodate to that.
Right. And Richard, how many teachers have we talked to that says, if the administrator walks into my classroom and I'm not teaching from the page that I'm supposed to be teaching from, and on the lesson that I'm supposed to be teaching from that day, I will be written up.
That's right.
And you know, I don't want to believe that it's actually the administrators in the building, the actual principals in the building. This is coming from higher and higher up.
The principals know better.
Right.
Yeah,
the principals know.
These are administrators at a higher level.
Right.
Who are simply passing this on. Right.
But the idea, the ridiculous idea that every student, because of the fact they're sitting in the classroom, is going to learn everything that the teacher is presenting, that is a fundamental misunderstanding. I'm going to say misunderstanding to be nice, because it's probably something worse than that. Misunderstanding of child development and learning in general.
It's a negation of child development. I mean, we know that not all kids do the same thing at the same time. They don't walk at the same time. They don't talk at the same time.
Right.
They don't do anything at the same time. They do it within a range, and the range gets broader and broader each year. But we're talking about Common Core.
Yeah. We didn't want to talk about Common Core today.
Don't get me started on Common Core.
I think we're doing some research on Common Core, and I think we're gonna present on that one or talk about that one next week.
We need to discuss Common Core.
Yeah. So I didn't mean to mention it.
He does that. Period. Once every program, he gets some subject and he picks at it until I get aroused. So,
but today is about recess.
About recess.
Right? But these educational policies create the problem that we're having with
That's right. And another thing we haven't mentioned yet when you talk to people about, well, why shouldn't we? Because there are people who have the case against recess, okay?
Right.
And they talk about engaged time, but they talk about two other issues. One is safety.
Right.
When kids go out, they get hurt.
Right.
But that's what happens with kids. That when you're playing, sometimes we have all hurt ourselves, scratched our knees, gotten bloody lips, bloody noses, cut lips. Yeah, when you play, sometimes that happens. But the other thing is the liability issue. Many schools are afraid of the liability issue.
Right.
So there's a safety issue of kids getting injured, but also some schools are in some pretty rough neighborhoods.
Right.
And to put the kids outside might put them at risk.
Right.
We acknowledge that.
Yeah. And I'm there with you. As far as, I think that, and this is horrible to say the way that it has to be said, but I do mean it. Sometimes kids need to get hurt. I remember my son, and I probably talk about my kids too much on this, but I remember my son was playing. He was, little. He was in machine pitch baseball, so he was young, and I remember he played catcher.
Right.
And one game, you teach kids all the proper mechanics for these things. And one day he was going to catch the ball, and he allowed his throwing hand to come from behind his back, and it kind of ventured out to the side a little bit, and the ball went down and hit the ground and came up and broke his finger. It hit his non-gloved hand and broke his finger. Well, it hurt, but it's a finger. They put a splint on it, and that was really it. What Connor learned from that, though, is he didn't make that mistake again, for one. And for two, the next game with a splint on his finger, he was playing catcher again. And
you survived.
He survived it. Right. And now, as he's playing U15 soccer, he plays goalie. Right. The kid is fearless because he knows, and he comes home and he'll have cleat marks on his legs and he'll have bruises. He had... One time, this is horrible, he had a cleat mark on his face. He was actually stepped on when he went for the ball one time. But he knows that he's going to be okay. He knows that, as long as I protect my head as best I can, so no concussions or anything like that, he knows he's going to be okay. And it allows him to play in such a way, he's hoping for a college scholarship or something like that to help pay for him he wants to go to medical school, to prepare him for that. But he knows how his body works. He can control his body, I think, better than I could. And I, too, played sports. but he knows his body so well.
Right.
Because he allowed himself to get hurt. He put himself out there and took some risks.
Right.
And he knows what risks are okay to take, and he knows which risks are not okay to take.
That makes me think of those playgrounds that are dangerous.
Yes.
You know, the one in Berkeley?
Yeah.
You know, that they have old sofas and steel rods and things that you could get hurt on. So it teaches kids to be careful. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with these minor cuts and scrapes, and we certainly don't want anybody to be hurt seriously, but if you're out there playing and stretching and going beyond your abilities, which is what we want kids to do, every once in a while you're going to get hurt.
Right.
Which is different than the safety issues of kids being molested or kidnapped.
Absolutely.
Or hurt in some way.
Absolutely.
So there are two safety issues. But there is this liability issue.
Right.
And you can't fault school administrators for being concerned about that, because in today's climate, if a kid gets injured on the playground, the chances of you getting sued are pretty high.
Right.
So I can see why schools are concerned about that, but you can't let that kind of fear limit the entire system.
You have to find some way to work around that.
That's right. You have to take those chances. And hope that things work out. So, but I think so you have safety, you have liability, but you also have the effects on learning. That's mainly what we've been talking about today. Is that, do we really gain anything by doing away with recess or art or music or any of these other non-essentials?
Right. And so
I think we don't.
Right. And looking at my notes where we were going with that, the idea was that, despite these reasons why, and these arguments against recess, despite those, the purpose, the true underlying purpose of cutting out recess and some of these other things was because we need more academic engaged time, with the illusion or delusion, whichever one we want to say, that just because you're sitting in class you're going to learn more. That is false. Right. That is not accurate. And there is nothing in the psychological or educational literature to suggest that it is true.
That's right.
That simply sitting in the classroom makes you learn more. That's not true.
And that's the important message in all that we've talked about today, is there simply is no support for the notion that having only academic engaged time provides any advantage, provides any gain. It just isn't true. There's no support for it. And in these days of using evidence-based interventions or evidence-based instruction, which is what we're told to do, the evidence is that kids need to have a break. They need to have breaks.
Right. And in fact, that is the recommendation. That is what the educational science suggests as recommendations for when kids aren't performing at their highest level. Just give them a short break and let them get back at it.
And their pediatricians have said the same thing. The American Academy of Pediatrics has come out in favor of recess.
Right.
It's better for kids to have recess.
Right. So we need these brain breaks. We need these opportunities to disengage.
Right.
So that when we re-engage, that connection can be stronger.
That's right. If you think about, you talked about the brain earlier. When you think about how the brain works, our brain uses two things for fuel. One is oxygen and one is glucose.
Right.
And if you get out and and that oxygen and glucose are brought to the brain by the blood system. That's how those two fuels get to your brain, is through the blood. So by going outside and re-oxygenating that blood, getting new oxygen in, and getting it up to your brain, you're cleaning out that whole system in a way, and you're rejuvenating your brain because you're getting fresh blood and fresh oxygen to your brain.
Right.
So from biologically, it makes sense to have recess. Just get more oxygen up there.
Right.
Because you sit in a classroom for hours and hours and hours and hours, and you're just going to get tired. You're just going to wear down.
Right. Right. Yeah. You there has to be some. And you used this word a few minutes ago. There has to be some arousal. There has to be some something to
reactivate the system.
Yes. So, and recess is a wonderful way to do that. I mean, it doesn't require any teacher planning. It doesn't require anything except for going out and just monitoring and making sure nobody runs away.
That's right. Whatever you lose in time, you make up for in arousal and activation and rejuvenation of the system.
Right. Right.
That's a good trade-off.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with all of this said, and we've already touched on it, we appreciate the fact that there are some problems with reinstituting recess.
Right. Yeah, there are some practical problems that we have to solve.
Yeah, whether it's safety, as you mentioned earlier, the weather.
That's true.
Let's be honest. We're located in Central Florida. It's hot in August, September, October, November. It's hot outside,
right.
and to have little ones out, playing at 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right.
It's hot, and
right.
so those are realistic issues that have to be considered because you have to think about their safety.
Under those conditions, even the children don't want a 15-minute recess.
Right.
They're ready to come back in after 5 or 6 minutes of that heat.
Right.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
That's all right. Come in, get a drink, and settle down. They're not going to stay out there in that heat for longer than 10 minutes.
Right. And there are times when even at 8:30 in the morning it's too hot to be outside.
That's right. That's right.
So that the weather is an issue again here in Central Florida and lots of other places in the country. In the afternoon it's raining.
Right.
You can't go outside and play when it's raining. Right. But there's nothing to say that recess necessarily has to be outside.
That's right.
It can be an inside free time.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's safety, the weather, the other issue. The case against recess is also, part of the reason why it's hard to reinstitute recess, and again that is time.
Right.
Here in Florida, the expectation is that students have somewhere between 60 to 90 minutes of uninterrupted reading time every day.
Right. Every
day. So there's only so many minutes in the school day. And so if you have 90 minutes of uninterrupted reading time combined with language arts class, math class, science, because we hope that they keep science in, lunch and all these other subjects, the time very quickly disappears. So there's not the time given during the day to be able to do that. And so it goes back to some other policy issues that may not be specifically addressing recess, but certainly affect the opportunity to have recess. And again, that is time. There just isn't enough time during the day for students to be able to have those opportunities. So we recognize that, and we also know that there are people who are working to overcome some of those issues. At least here in Polk County, we know that there are some people who are working to change some of that so that we can better navigate some of those issues and so that we can make sure that they have that time.
Right. It's a thoughtful group of people who are addressing this issue in Polk County. So that was encouraging to hear them talk and take this issue seriously and to really dig in and really overcome these obstacles that clearly are there.
Right.
But they're working hard to overcome them, and I think they're doing an excellent job. So we're excited about it.
And we're part of that conversation here in Polk County. And, if you're from somewhere else and would like some support or anything, please reach out to us and contact us. We're happy to help out and to add our voice to the conversation and to make some of the recommendations and things that we're trying to do here in Polk County because it is like everything. I mean, it seems like we say this every week. It really is going to be a social movement that works to change some of these things. And so we all have to unify our voice to help elicit some of the changes that we're needing.
And like so many other issues that we talk about in Paedeia and the mental breakdown, we want to do what's best for children.
Right.
We want to do what do kids really need, and that's what we want to be advocating and pushing and encouraging people to think about it from the kids' point of view. What do they really need? And one of the things they really need is this recess time. I mean, there's no question about that. So we encourage you to get involved in that conversation.
Absolutely. So Well, I think that's
it.
That's it for today.
Okay.
All's well. So join in on the conversation. Write to us. We had some listeners on Mixlr, which is always nice. We love it when our listeners chime in and talk to us and join in on the conversation. We encourage you to check us out on iTunes. If you haven't listened to us on iTunes yet, it's pretty good.
Pretty good.
I think.
It's very good. Very good.
If you do listen to us on iTunes, we would love for you to write a review, because by writing reviews and rating us, that's how other people find out about us, and they can join in on the conversation. We had this nice review by the leaders over at the New Teacher Podcast. It's a new podcast that was just started not long ago, and by Anthony Arno, and he wrote a very nice review for us, and we appreciate that. And his podcast is really good. He has teachers on, and he's talking about different things I learned about, and not that I'm doing advertisement for Anthony, but it was an excellent podcast where he was interviewing this teacher, high school teacher down in, I think he was in Louisiana, and he does this year-long course called, assignment called Tales from the Crypt. And what they will do is each of his students will research a person in one of the local cemeteries, and then they'll do this entire presentation about the person's life and talk about them and everything. And so they're learning about all kinds of things. So if you have the opportunity and you're a teacher and you're interested in any of those things, check out Anthony's podcast. Again, it's called the New Teacher Podcast. He's doing a great job over there. So check him out. But again, I kind of went off on that because I listened to his podcast the other day and it was fantastic. But if you get the opportunity, do jump on and learn about ours. That's how I learned about Anthony's, because he wrote a review on our podcast, and so that's how other people will find out about ours here at Paedeia and at the Mental Breakdown. So write a review. Let us know what you think. You can write to us on iTunes or on Twitter at Dr. Berney, at DRBERNEY is our handle, so that you can get to us there. But you can also get to us on Facebook. We got lots of pages Twitter, and stuff.
iTunes.
Facebook is we have the Mental Breakdown. We have Paedeia, Paedeia. You can check us out either place. Follow us. We're always posting columns and articles and news reportings, and always trying to repost things by our hero, Diane Ravitch. Put lots of her stuff out there so everybody can read it. So stay in touch with us. Follow us. Join in on the conversation because we'd love to hear from you, and keep talking about these things. All right?
Keep it going.
All right.
Okay.
So until next week, where we're going to be talking about Common Core.
Common Core.
All right.
Thanks for listening. And
so I'm Dr. Berney.
I'm Dr. Richard.
Have a terrific week and a happy Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's right.
Bye-bye.